Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So in this episode, we're going to look at a question that has come up. How on earth did some of the people who were right there not see Kiely, right? We're going to deal with that. That's certainly a question of certainly some relevance. One just really looks at the topography. It's quite simple to answer, but it does actually raise a logistical issue, which is quite scary and quite frightening. But that's the one aspect we're going to deal with. And then we're also going to look at video footage. Is it direct evidence? And if it is direct evidence, what does that mean? And then the final thing I want to look at is it is quite without precedent in a way, unprecedented. I think what is taking place now, it's not something that I'm unfamiliar with. I've written over 100 books, obviously, on true crime. I've had to deal with the whole counter-narrative culture in big cases like JonBenet Ramsey and other cases. So I've dealt with this nonsense before, but people in my community may not have. And so what is totally unprecedented is this huge channel coming along and dictating the narrative, going on to all these other channels, dictating it there, them playing the same tune. And how are you supposed to deal with that? How are you supposed to deal with this nonsense? So we are going to talk about that, just a kind of a little bit of a toolbox, how to deal with some of these ridiculous arguments. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment. There's also True Crime Rocket Science merch that's out there, including Does That Make Sense? And also, I'm not going to take it further than that, which is brand new. So look out for that. It is in the description. And let's get started. So to start off with, it is certainly quite a shock. Not just seeing the vehicle going in, but also seeing that there were other people in the area. There were other people nearby. There were other people that could have seen something. In fact, there's also lights leaving the campground at the time that Kiely sort of takes a wrong turn. But what we want to concentrate on, and I mean the reason why they couldn't really see anything was because of the thick tree lining, and that's quite obvious. But the other side, much closer to where Kiely was, along that bay, along that beach, was the there's a little hill on the other side there, but it's quite bare around that hill. And so you kind of wonder and you kind of wish if only they'd seen something and then responded. And I think there are two ways of thinking about that. The one is that the topography, so where they would likely have parked their vehicles, would have been some way slightly to the rear. And because of that, they would have been the view of the false isthmus, the peninsula, would have been obscured to some extent by the rising topography, right? They wouldn't have parked right at the water's edge. If they had parked at the water's edge, they would have probably seen what they needed to see. But because they would have parked some way back, they wouldn't have seen it. That's the one side. The other side, which I think really brings home just how heartbreaking all of this is if by some miracle someone had heard something, if by some miracle someone had seen something, it's extremely unlikely that they would have been able to get to Kiely and even save her. So in other words, if you could have imagined, let's say there were 2 or 3 vehicles that parked near that little hill on the far side of that bay, if they'd actually seen the vehicle going in, and if, let's say by some miracle, they'd gotten to Kiely's vehicle, say, 90 seconds later, it would still have been tremendously difficult to quickly rescue her. Obviously, we know that there were some windows that were 2/3 open. We also know exactly where the vehicle was. They didn't. So they would have arrived on the scene not knowing which vehicles to, which windows to target, and also not knowing exactly where Kiely was. And just that period of hesitation would have cost valuable seconds. So even if they had known exactly where Kiely was and you'd said, okay, get from that point to where Kiely is and get in the water and go under the water and try and this is like in the dark, and try and find Kiely, the odds of actually rescuing her, bringing her out alive, would be virtually zero. Obviously, something they could have done is shone their vehicle lights on that area and possibly try to resuscitate her. But, even if they'd operated with 100% efficiency, speed, effectiveness, bear in mind some of them are also intoxicated, the odds were very much against Kiely coming out of that situation alive, right? Now I want to deal with something else, and it's something that I noticed on another channel. A former law enforcement fellow, I think ex-detective actually, basically saying that, let me try and get the quote verbatim. So, word for word, what he said was, what this video shows does not rule out whether this is foul play or just an accident. Now, if I understand that correctly, what this former law enforcement person was saying is that this video provides no confirmation of anything. It doesn't actually extend our knowledge base one way or another. In other words, you've got a video, and what it's really, and it's factual, it's giving you a time, it's giving you a place, it's confirming the cell phone ping, and other things as well, circumstantially, but it's basically forensically completely relevant to everything that's going on, all the questions that are being asked. But the way that this person addresses it, former law enforcement, as I say, is basically saying whether you have the video or you don't, it doesn't really change your opinion of the case, which, can I be honest, I find that laughable, but let's take it a little bit further. Now, you might say that's unkind. It's really unkind to not say a nice thing about that kind of assessment. But I think sometimes it's warranted that you are somewhat, what's the word, that you show a certain degree of contempt for a statement that is such contempt for the facts. That's what we're here for. We are here to investigate crimes. We are here to find out the truth, to find justice. And so when you actually see the truth, are you still going to pretend that you don't know what it is? You're still going to say, this doesn't change anything, we're still going to try and process this information. So as a way to address this question, I want to address it in two ways. And it's really just making definitions that you should be aware of. If you're in true crime, it's sort of True Crime 101. Do you know what direct evidence is? Do you know what indirect evidence is? Do you know what circumstantial evidence is, right? So when we talk about direct evidence is the best, it's the gold standard in terms of evidence. It's the most inculpatory evidence that you can find. It's really the strongest evidence that's out there. Video evidence is considered to be direct evidence or real evidence. And a witness would basically have to say what the relevance is of the production of that sort of evidence. So a witness would sort of take you through that direct evidence. But let me say this again. Photo and video recordings are considered direct evidence. It's taking you right into the incident at the time of the incident and showing you how an incident took place. And so it's kind of the holy grail in true crime. It's the missing puzzle piece to say, this is what happened, this is how it happened, this is when it happened, and other things around that. These people were present or no one was present. This was the situation, right? The holy grail of true crime is having video footage of something taking place. That tends to sort of be the final revelation right, as it has been in this case, except obviously it's now being said this is not a revelation. Which brings us to another definition, and it's the definition, you may have heard of this. Do you know what a smoking gun is, right? Now, a smoking gun refers to scientific evidence that is highly suggestive in favor of a particular hypothesis that's sometimes called smoking gun evidence. Now, let me ask you, do you think this video that you're seeing is scientific evidence, first of all, yes or no? Is it scientific evidence or is it not? And if you say it looks like UFO footage or it's staged, I think some people have said, or it is just the wrong timestamp, or whatever your argument is, either it is scientific evidence or it's not. So if you say it is scientific evidence, then the next question is, well, is it highly suggestive in favor of a particular hypothesis? Is it? Well, if it is, which hypothesis is that? So as someone who's been in true crime for quite a long time, I would call this smoking gun evidence. Now, what I find quite interesting is this former law enforcement guy, I wonder whether he would say that. I've got the feeling that he would say it's not, that it actually doesn't really tell you anything. Because he basically is saying, let's go back to what he said, he basically is saying, what this video shows does not rule out whether this is a foul play or just an accident. In other words, he's saying what this video shows, and then as I understand it, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what this video shows is kind of nothing. It doesn't really tell you anything. So in other words, it's a smoking gun where the gun is smoking like a cigarette. It's not literally a smoking gun. In other words, it's turning a smoking gun into a smoking gun. So as I say, a smoking gun or direct evidence, and in this case video footage, tends to be unshakable proof of something having happened, or put otherwise, something not having happened. Now what's quite interesting is in true crime we normally got to fill in a blank space with something that we think is likely based on what we do know. And here we've actually gotten this video footage in an incredible, sort of very fortuitous, we're very lucky to have come upon this. And now that blank space that's been there, we can now take away. So what's quite interesting is some people are continuing to insist that the blank space remains, that missing puzzle piece is still missing. And so that's why I want to address my community, the true crime rocket science community. How do you deal with the psychology? How do you deal with this sort of nonsense? And I have to say, I think the first step, there's a long answer to that and a short answer. I think the first step is that you don't deal with it. That someone who's obviously stuck on this sort of thing, you don't really deal with that person. You deal with someone who thinks in a logical way and in a reasonable way, and you don't waste your time with irrational people who can't think logically. There is a longer answer to that question, and I'm going to deal with that probably in a separate episode to this one. But the short answer is, how do you deal with that sort of nonsense issue? You simply don't deal with it. You don't engage, you don't answer, you don't have a debate. You're just wasting your time. I do think what is so valuable about this case is it has revealed the true crime community to itself, whether you admit that or not. It's also helped me get to know the true crime community in a lot more detail than I did previously. And also the creators. I've gotten to know where I stand with you guys. And I think you've gotten to know where you stand with me. I think we've all seen how a big creator comes along and how that effectively changes the narrative for everyone. And even when the video comes out, it still changes the narrative. That speaks volumes. That alone tells you a lot about who you are and also who I am. And obviously there are people watching while this is taking place. And although the numbers are on your side, you've got a channel with millions of people, those aren't true crime people. They are fans of their heroes. And you've now got those fans on your channel. And of course you've got to now educate them in true crime, which I guess you'll try to do. But if you don't care about facts and details and putting evidence together, well, then you've got your work cut out for you, don't you? So I'm going to come back to this issue. Should true crime hold itself accountable? And I'm certainly not going to do that. I know it seems like I'm doing that. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to just be doing my work, and the dog can wag its own tail and do its sort of the thing that you guys have been doing. Blow smoke up one another's asses and all that kind of thing. And then that's your version of true crime. There's also another version, the authentic version. If you're interested in the authentic version, I do have some merch out. Check it out. Have a look at some of the hoodies and so on. Does that make sense? And I'm not going to take it further than that. One of you made a suggestion. Let's definitely look into that. So I'm going to take this whole conversation a lot further, but not for right now. I'm interested to see what some of you say and all of that kind of thing. Remember, I'll be dealing with the Dharma series on Netflix. There's actually another series that started on Netflix, the Dharma tapes. So there's quite a lot to talk about in that particular area. So thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.